This statement refers to a famous story from the Hebrew Bible, specifically the book of Genesis, where Jacob wrestles with a mysterious figure. Here's a breakdown of the story and why some might interpret it as God winning by cheating. The story, Genesis chapter 32, verse 22-32, 1. Jacob's fear. Jacob is on his way to meet his estranged brother Esau, whom he previously tricked out of his birthright and blessing. He is fearful of Esau's reaction. 2. The wrestling match. During the night while Jacob is alone, a mysterious man appears and wrestles with him until daybreak. 3. The dislocation. When the man sees that he cannot overpower Jacob, he touches Jacob's hip socket, dislocating it. This is the cheating aspect some refer to. The opponent resorts to a disabling move when he can't win through sheer strength. 4. Jacob's demand. Despite his injury, Jacob refuses to let the man go until he blesses him. 5. New name and blessing. The man asks Jacob's name and then gives him a new name, Israel, meaning he struggles with God, or God strives. He then blesses Jacob. 6. Jacob's realization. Jacob realizes he has wrestled with God, or an angel of God, face to face and survived. He names the place Peniel, face of God. Why some interpret it as God winning by cheating. The cheating interpretation comes from the detail that the mysterious figure dislocates Jacob's hip after realizing he cannot defeat Jacob through direct wrestling strength. From a purely physical, human wrestling perspective, this move could be seen as a low blow or an unfair tactic. However, the traditional theological interpretation is different. Divine revelation/testing. Most religious interpretations view this encounter not as a literal wrestling match where God needs to cheat to win, but as a profound spiritual encounter, a test, or a divine revelation, demonstration of power and humility. The dislocation of Jacob's hip is often seen as a demonstration of the divine figure's ultimate power and a way to humble Jacob. It shows Jacob that despite his human strength and cunning, he is still ultimately subject to God's power. It leaves him with a permanent reminder of the encounter and his reliance on God. The struggle of faith. The wrestling itself symbolizes Jacob's lifelong struggle with God, with others, and within himself. His persistence in holding on for a blessing is often highlighted as a positive aspect of his faith. Symbolic, not literal. It's generally understood as a symbolic narrative, rather than a literal athletic contest between a human and the omnipotent creator of the universe. God doesn't need to win a wrestling match. The point is the spiritual transformation of Jacob. So, while a very literal reading of the hip dislocation might lead some to joke about cheating, the deeper meaning of the story is about Jacob's transformation, his perseverance in faith, and the mysterious nature of encountering the divine. Jacob is a pivotal figure in the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. He is one of the patriarchs of the Israelites, the grandson of Abraham, and the son of Isaac and Rebekah. His story is primarily found in the book of Genesis, in the Hebrew Bible. Here's a summary of his key life events and why he's significant. 1. Birth and early life. He was born as the second of twin sons to Isaac and Rebekah, his older twin brother being Esau. Even in the womb he was said to be grasping Esau's heel, which led to his name Jacob, meaning heel grabber or supplanter. This foreshadowed his later actions. 2. Birthright and blessing. The deception. Birthright. Jacob famously acquired Esau's birthright, which usually meant a double portion of inheritance and leadership of the family, for a bowl of lentil stew when Esau was famished. Blessing. Later, with his mother Rebekah's help, Jacob deceived his blind and aging father Isaac into giving him the blessing intended for Esau. This involved Jacob disguising himself with animal skins to mimic Esau's hairy arms. This act caused a deep rift between the brothers, and Esau vowed to kill Jacob. 3. Flight to Haran. To escape Esau's wrath, Jacob fled to his uncle Laban's household in Haran. On his journey he had a significant dream at Bethel, which he named House of God, where he saw a ladder, or stairway, reaching to heaven with angels ascending and descending. And God reaffirmed the covenant made with Abraham and Isaac, promising him land and numerous descendants. 4. Marriage and children. Jacob worked for Laban, intending to marry Laban's younger daughter Rachel, whom he loved. However, Laban tricked him into marrying his older daughter Leah first. After Jacob worked 7 years for Rachel, he then worked another 7 years for Rachel. He also had children with Leah's servant Zilpah and Rachel's servant Bilhah. Jacob eventually became the father of 12 sons and 1 daughter, Dinah. These 12 sons became the progenitors of the 12 tribes of Israel. 5. Return to Canaan and reconciliation with Esau. After 20 years, Jacob decided to return to Canaan with his large family and possessions, fearing Laban's shifting attitude. Before meeting Esau, he sent gifts ahead to appease him. This is when the wrestling encounter with God/an angel at Peniel occurred, resulting in his hip injury and his name being changed to Israel. He eventually met Esau, and surprisingly, Esau embraced him, and they reconciled. 6. Life in Canaan and descent into Egypt. Jacob settled in Canaan. His favorite son, Joseph, was sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. Years later, a famine led Jacob and his entire family to move to Egypt, where Joseph had risen to become a powerful vizier under Pharaoh. This move marked the beginning of the Israelites' long stay in Egypt, which eventually led to their enslavement and the Exodus. 7. Death and legacy. Jacob died in Egypt and was brought back to Canaan to be buried in the cave of Machpelah, the family tomb of Abraham and Isaac. Significance of Jacob's/Israel, patriarch of Israel. His 12 sons are the direct ancestors of the 12 tribes that form the nation of Israel. This makes him the direct father of the Israelite people. The name Israel. His new name, Israel, becomes the name for the entire nation and continues to be of profound religious and national significance. It reflects the idea of struggling with God and persevering in faith. Contradictory character. Jacob is often seen as a complex character, a trickster and deceiver in his early life, but also a man of deep faith, who ultimately wrestled with God and was transformed. His story highlights themes of divine election, human failings, repentance, reconciliation, and the fulfillment of God's promises. Let's break down the birthright and blessing part of Jacob's story, as it's a crucial element that shapes his character and the narrative. In ancient Near Eastern cultures, and specifically within the context of the patriarchal narratives in Genesis, the birthright and the blessing were distinct but highly significant concepts for the firstborn son. 1. The birthright. Genesis chapter 25, verse 29-34. The birthright referred to the special privileges and status afforded to the firstborn son in a family. It typically included a double portion of the father's inheritance. The firstborn would receive a larger share of the family's wealth and property compared to his siblings. Leadership of the family. He would inherit the patriarchal authority and responsibility for the family after the father's death. Special priestly duties. In some contexts, the firstborn might also have specific religious or priestly roles. The incident: Esau's hunger. One day, Esau, the older twin, came in from the field, exhausted and famished. Jacob's opportunism. Jacob was cooking a pot of lentil stew. Esau, desperate for food, asked Jacob for some. The bargain. Jacob saw an opportunity. He told Esau, "First sell me your birthright." Esau, focused only on his immediate hunger, impulsively and carelessly agreed, saying, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" He swore an oath and effectively despised his birthright by selling it for a single meal. Jacob's gain. Jacob gave him bread and lentil stew, and Esau ate, drank, and then left. This act solidified Jacob's claim to the birthright, though it was obtained through a manipulative bargain. Significance. This incident highlights Esau's short-sightedness and lack of appreciation for his heritage, contrasting with Jacob's ambition and long-term strategic thinking, even if it involved cunning. It sets the stage for the later conflict. 2. The blessing. Genesis chapter 27. The blessing given by the aging father was distinct from the birthright, and was considered incredibly powerful and binding. It was essentially a prophetic pronouncement that conveyed divine favor, prosperity, dominion, and the continuation of the covenant promises made to Abraham and Isaac to a specific son. Once given, it was generally believed to be irrevocable. The incident: Isaac's intention. When Isaac was old and blind, he wanted to give his final patriarchal blessing to his firstborn son Esau, whom he favored, perhaps because Esau was a hunter and brought him game. He asked Esau to hunt some wild game and prepare him a tasty meal before receiving the blessing. Rebekah's intervention. Rebekah, Jacob's mother, who favored Jacob, overheard Isaac's plan. She remembered a prophecy given to her before the twins' birth, that the older will serve the younger. She was determined that Jacob should receive the blessing. The deception. Rebekah quickly devised a plan. She told Jacob to bring her 2 young goats. She prepared a meal that tasted like the one Isaac preferred. Knowing Isaac's blindness, she put Esau's best clothes on Jacob, which would carry Esau's scent, and covered Jacob's smooth hands and neck with the skin of the goats to mimic Esau's hairiness. Jacob's impersonation. Jacob went to Isaac, impersonating Esau. Isaac was suspicious because Jacob's voice was different, but the smell of the clothes and the feel of the hairy hands convinced him. The blessing given. Isaac then gave the full, powerful blessing to Jacob, which included promises of fertile lands, abundant produce, dominion over nations, and that his brothers would bow down to him. Crucially, it stated, "May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed." Esau's rage. Immediately after Jacob left, Esau returned from hunting. When he discovered he had been tricked, and his brother had stolen his blessing, he was furious, and cried out bitterly. He begged Isaac for another blessing. But Isaac said he had given all to Jacob. Esau then vowed to kill Jacob. Significance. This deception cemented the animosity between Jacob and Esau, forcing Jacob to flee. It shows Jacob's cunning and willingness to manipulate to achieve what he, and Rebekah, believed was his destiny, or what God intended. The blessing itself is incredibly significant because it means that the covenant promises of God, land, descendants, blessing to all nations through his lineage, would pass through Jacob rather than Esau. Despite the questionable means of acquiring it, the narrative suggests that God's plan ultimately unfolded as Jacob's descendants became the nation of Israel. In summary, the birthright was a right of inheritance and status, acquired through a quick bargain, while the blessing was a spiritual and prophetic pronouncement of future prosperity and leadership, obtained through an elaborate deception. Both events were pivotal in establishing Jacob's destiny as the patriarch through whom the lineage of Israel would continue. Okay, picking up from the birthright and blessing incident where Jacob fled from Esau's wrath, here's what happened later in Jacob's life. 1. Flight to Haran and Jacob's dream. Genesis chapter 28. Journey and vision at Bethel. Jacob fled north towards Haran, where his uncle Laban lived. One night he stopped to rest and used a stone as a pillow. He had a profound dream, a ladder, or stairway, extending from earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending on it. At the top, God stood and reaffirmed the covenant promises made to Abraham and Isaac, promising Jacob land, numerous descendants who would bless all the families of the earth, and God's protective presence. Bethel. Jacob awoke deeply moved. He consecrated the place, naming it Bethel, meaning house of God, and vowed that if God would be with him and bring him back safely, then the Lord would be his God, and he would give 1/10 of everything back to God. 2 years in Haran. Love, Laban's deception and family. Genesis chapters 29 to 31. Meeting Rachel. Jacob arrived in Haran and soon met his cousin Rachel, Laban's younger daughter, at a well. He immediately fell in love with her. Laban's cunning. Then the Lord would be his God, and he would give 1/10 of everything back to God. 2 years in Haran. Love, Laban's deception and family. Genesis chapters 29 to 31. Meeting Rachel. Jacob arrived in Haran and soon met his cousin Rachel, Laban's younger daughter, at a well. He immediately fell in love with her. Laban's cunning. Jacob offered to work for Laban for 7 years to marry Rachel. Laban agreed. However, after the 7 years were complete, Laban tricked Jacob. On the wedding night, he substituted his older daughter, Leah D., for Rachel, 2 wives. When Jacob discovered the deception, Laban justified it by saying it was not customary to marry the younger daughter before the elder. He offered Rachel to Jacob for another 7 years of service. So Jacob married both Leah and Rachel. Many children. The 12 tribes begin. Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. Seeing Leah's unhappiness, God enabled her to have children, while Rachel was initially barren. Leah's sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. Bilhah's sons, Rachel's servant, Dan, Naphtali. Zilpah's sons, Leah's servant, Gad, Asher. Leah's further sons, daughter, Issachar, Zebulun, Dinah, daughter, Rachel's sons. Finally, Rachel conceived and gave birth to Joseph. Later, back in Canaan, she would bear Benjamin, but die in childbirth, increasing wealth. After his 14 years of service for his wives, Jacob worked for Laban for 6 more years, focusing on increasing his own flocks and wealth through clever breeding techniques, often outsmarting Laban. Departure from Laban. Laban's attitude towards Jacob became hostile as Jacob's wealth grew. God instructed Jacob to return to his homeland. Jacob secretly gathered his family and possessions and departed without telling Laban. Laban pursued them but was warned by God in a dream not to harm Jacob. They eventually made a covenant and parted ways. 3. The return journey and reconciliation. Genesis chapters 32 to 33. Fear of Esau. As Jacob approached Canaan, his greatest fear was meeting Esau, still remembering the threat to his life. He sent messengers ahead, who reported that Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men. Jacob was terrified and divided his camp into two to increase the chances of survival. Wrestling with God, Peniel. The night before meeting Esau, Jacob sent his family and possessions across the Jabbok River and remained alone. A mysterious man wrestled with him until dawn. When the man could not overpower Jacob, he touched Jacob's hip socket, dislocating it. Jacob refused to let go until the man blessed him. The man then changed Jacob's name to Israel, meaning he struggles with God, or God strives, because he had struggled with God and with humans and had overcome. Jacob realized he had wrestled with God, face to face, and named the place Peniel, face of God. He walked with a limp from that day forward, meeting Esau. The next morning, Jacob, still limping, saw Esau approaching. He bowed down 7 times before his brother. Surprisingly, Esau ran to him, embraced him, and they wept. Esau accepted Jacob's gifts, and their reconciliation was complete. 4. Life in Canaan. Genesis chapters 34 to 36. Dinah's ordeal. Jacob settled near Shechem. His daughter Dinah was raped by Shechem, the son of the local ruler. Jacob's sons, especially Simeon and Levi, avenged their sister by deceiving the men of Shechem into being circumcised and then slaughtering them, leading to tension and fear for Jacob's family's safety. Rachel's death and Benjamin's birth. As they traveled, Rachel gave birth to her second son, Benjamin Foods, but died in childbirth near Bethlehem. This was a profound grief for Jacob. Reuben's transgression. Jacob's firstborn son, Reuben, committed an offense by sleeping with Jacob's concubine Bilhah, Rachel's servant, which cost him his birthright and leadership status among his brothers. 5. Joseph's story and descent to Egypt. Genesis chapters 37 to 49. Jacob's favoritism. Jacob loved Joseph, the son of his beloved Rachel, more than all his other sons, giving him a special coat of many colors. This favoritism fueled his brother's jealousy. Joseph sold into slavery. The jealous brothers conspired against Joseph, eventually selling him into slavery in Egypt and telling Jacob that a wild animal had killed him. Jacob was heartbroken for many years. Famine and reunion. Many years later, a severe famine struck Canaan. Jacob sent his sons to Egypt to buy grain, unaware that Joseph had risen to become Pharaoh's powerful second-in-command. Through a series of events orchestrated by Joseph, the family was eventually reunited in Egypt. Migration to Egypt. At Joseph's invitation, and with Pharaoh's blessing, Jacob and his entire family, 70 people in total, migrated to Egypt, settling in the fertile land of Goshen. This marked the beginning of the Israelites' stay in Egypt. 6. Jacob's death and legacy. Genesis chapters 49 to 50. Blessing his sons. Before his death, Jacob called all his sons together and gave them individual blessings, prophetic pronouncements about their future and the destiny of their tribes. He foretold that the scepter would not depart from Judah, foreshadowing the line of kings, including David, and ultimately the Messiah. Burial in Canaan. Jacob died in Egypt. Joseph carried out his father's dying wish, bringing his body back to Canaan and burying him in the cave of Machpelah, the family tomb, alongside Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah. Jacob's life is a saga of ambition, deception, struggle, perseverance, divine intervention, family drama, and ultimately, a transformation into Israel, the patriarch through whom God's covenant promises would be fulfilled. His 12 sons become the foundation of the nation of Israel. That's a great question, and it highlights a key aspect of the story and the cultural context of the time. Here's why Jacob likely agreed to give another 7 years of service for Rachel, despite being tricked by Laban. 1. Deep love for Rachel. The Bible emphasizes that Jacob loved Rachel deeply. Genesis chapter 29 verse 18. He was genuinely smitten with her. His desire to marry her was so strong that 7 years of labor felt only a few days because of his love for her the first time around. When he was tricked, his love for Rachel didn't diminish. If anything, the frustration of being denied her might have intensified his desire. 2. Cultural and legal norms. Binding agreements. While Laban's actions were deceptive, Jacob had already entered into an agreement for a wife, even if Laban manipulated which wife. Breaking such an agreement might have been difficult or culturally unacceptable. Bride wealth / service. In that ancient culture, it was common for a groom to pay a bride wealth, a payment to the bride's family, or, if he didn't have the wealth, to provide years of service in exchange for his wife. Jacob was essentially paying for his wives through labor. Once he had already completed the initial 7 years, he was already heavily invested. Limited options. Jacob was a fugitive from Esau, far from his own family and resources. He was dependent on Laban's household. He didn't have the leverage to demand Rachel without further concessions. Nor could he easily just leave with Leah and demand Rachel without a proper agreement. 3. Laban's leverage. Laban held all the cards. He had both daughters. He was Jacob's only immediate relative and host in Haran. He controlled the social and economic situation. 4. Desire for Rachel to be his first wife. Even though he was married to Leah, Jacob's heart was set on Rachel. Agreeing to the additional 7 years secured Rachel as his second wife, but essentially the wife he always wanted to be his primary. Laban offered a deal where he could marry Rachel immediately after Leah's week of wedding celebrations were over, as long as he agreed to the additional service. This immediate gratification, combined with his love, was a strong incentive. So, while Jacob was certainly angered and felt betrayed by Laban's cunning, his overwhelming love for Rachel, combined with the cultural expectations and his vulnerable position as a guest and a man without immediate family support, compelled him to agree to the additional 7 years of service. You've hit upon some profound questions that have been debated by theologians and readers of the Bible for centuries. It's true that on the surface it seems Jacob, the deceiver, prospered. Let's break down why God didn't stop Jacob and what happened to Esau. Why didn't God stop Jacob? This is a central theological puzzle in the story of Jacob. Here are some common interpretations. 1. God works through imperfect people. A consistent theme throughout the Bible is that God uses imperfect, flawed human beings to accomplish his purposes. Abraham, Moses, David, all had significant moral failings. Jacob's story illustrates that God's plans are not contingent on human perfection. His grace and sovereignty operate despite, and sometimes even through, human sin and manipulation. 2. Divine sovereignty versus human responsibility. The narrative often highlights a tension between God's sovereign plan and human free will, and responsibility for their actions. God's plan was already revealed. Before Jacob and Esau were born, God told Rebekah, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Genesis chapter 25, verse 23. This prophecy indicated that Jacob, the younger, was chosen for a special role in God's covenant, human agency. While God had a plan, Jacob and Rebekah chose to achieve it through deceptive means, rather than trusting God to bring it about in his own time and way. Their actions had consequences: Jacob's flight, long exile, family strife. But they didn't derail God's ultimate purpose for Jacob to be the patriarch through whom the covenant would continue. 3. The blessing was not just about earthly prosperity. While the blessing included material wealth, its core was the continuation of the covenant promises, the promise of land, numerous descendants, and being a blessing to all nations. This spiritual inheritance was what God intended for Jacob from the start, as revealed in the prophecy to Rebekah. 4. Jacob's transformation. While Jacob did prosper materially, his life was also filled with hardship, as a direct consequence of his earlier actions. Years of exile. He had to flee his home for decades. Laban's deception. He was tricked and exploited by his uncle Laban for 20 years, experiencing firsthand the pain of deception. Family troubles. He faced immense grief over Joseph's supposed death, rivalry among his wives, and the violent actions of his sons, e.g., Dinah's story, Reuben's transgression. The limp. His wrestling with God left him with a permanent limp, a physical reminder of his struggle and God's power. These challenges are often seen as part of God's process of refining Jacob, transforming him from a cunning heel-grabber into Israel, one who struggles with God and humanity, and prevails through reliance on God. His character deepens considerably. So God didn't stop him, in the sense of preventing the blessing from being fulfilled through him because Jacob was already chosen for that role. However, God allowed the natural consequences of Jacob's deceit to play out, using those difficulties to shape and mature Jacob's character. What happened to Esau? Did he also live a nice life? Esau's life is often contrasted with Jacob's. While he lost the primary birthright and blessing, he also lived a prosperous life in many respects, though perhaps not one of the same covenantal significance. Initial rage and flight. After realizing he was tricked, Esau was filled with murderous rage against Jacob, which led to Jacob's flight. Establishment in Seir, Edom. Esau eventually moved away from Canaan and settled in the mountainous region of Seir, which became known as Edom. He became the progenitor of the Edomites, a nation that would often be in conflict with the Israelites later in history. Wealth and family. Esau also accumulated significant wealth, flocks, and a large family. Genesis chapter 36 details his descendants. He was not destitute or cursed. he established his own powerful nation. Reconciliation. Crucially, when Jacob returned from Haran, Esau met him, not with the expected vengeance, but with an outpouring of compassion and forgiveness. Genesis chapter 33. This is a beautiful moment in the narrative where Esau, despite being wronged, shows a surprising generosity of spirit. He graciously accepted Jacob's gifts, and didn't seem to hold a grudge anymore. Loss of covenantal role. While Esau had earthly prosperity, he missed out on the specific divine covenant promised to Abraham and Isaac. He despised his birthright, indicating a lack of value for the spiritual inheritance associated with it. His focus was more on immediate gratification than on the long-term, spiritual promises. Conclusion. Esau did live a nice life in terms of material prosperity and establishing a powerful nation. He was not cursed or abandoned by God. However, his life lacked the specific covenantal significance that Jacob's had, and his initial carelessness with his birthright set him on a different path from the lineage of the chosen people. The Bible uses Esau as an example of one who was less concerned with spiritual inheritance, contrasting him with Jacob, who, despite his flaws, valued the blessing, and was ultimately the one through whom God's primary covenant promises were continued. That's a very insightful question, as it's one of the most enigmatic and debated passages in the Bible. The text itself, Genesis chapter 32, doesn't explicitly state why the wrestling happened, but theological and interpretive traditions offer several compelling reasons. 1. A test or preparation for Jacob, facing his past and future. Jacob is about to face his brother Esau, whom he deeply wronged, and from whom he fled in fear. He's also about to return to the Promised Land. The wrestling match can be seen as a final, intense spiritual test before these major life transitions. It's a trial by fire, forcing him to confront his deepest fears and insecurities, and to rely on something beyond his own cunning. Preparation for a new identity. Jacob is about to become Israel. This wrestling match is a painful but necessary part of that transformation. It strips away his self-reliance and shows him that his strength, cunning, and even physical ability are limited compared to the divine. He needs to move from being Jacob the supplanter to Israel, the one who struggles with God. 2. To demonstrate God's power and sovereignty. Humbling Jacob. Despite all his cleverness and ambition, Jacob is shown that he cannot truly overpower the divine. The touch to his hip, dislocating it, is a swift and easy demonstration of the mysterious figure's ultimate authority and power, leaving Jacob with a permanent physical reminder of the encounter. Divine initiative. The figure initiates the wrestling. This isn't Jacob seeking out a fight, it's a divine encounter that comes to him, showing that God is actively involved in his life, and is confronting him. 3. A blessing through struggle. The nature of faith. The passage highlights that a relationship with God isn't always easy or comfortable. It often involves struggle, perseverance, and even pain. Jacob's refusal to let go until he received a blessing signifies the tenacity of faith. The blessing, the name Israel, is given through the struggle, not apart from it. Intimacy with God. Wrestling is an intimate act. It's close quarters, full body contact. This encounter symbolizes a deep, personal, and transformative interaction between Jacob and the divine. Unlike any he's had before, he sees God face to face and lives. 4. A symbolic representation of Jacob's life. Jacob's life up to this point has been characterized by struggle, with Esau in the womb, for the birthright, for the blessing, with Laban, and now facing Esau again. The wrestling match is a literal embodiment of his life's theme. He has always been a grappler, and here he grapples with the ultimate opponent. Who was the mysterious figure? The text is deliberately ambiguous. Jacob identifies the figure as God. I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been preserved. Genesis chapter 32 verse 30. However, it's often interpreted in different ways. An angel of God. Many believe it was an angel, acting as God's messenger or representative. This is common in the Old Testament where God's presence is mediated. A pre-incarnate Christ. Theophany. Some Christian traditions believe it was a theophany, or Christophany, a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ, God himself. Jacob's own words imply he wrestled with God directly. Regardless of the exact identity, the figure is clearly divine or divinely empowered. In summary, the wrestling match wasn't about God needing to win a physical contest. It was a divinely orchestrated encounter designed to test and prepare Jacob for his future, humble him, and demonstrate God's ultimate power, transform his identity from Jacob, supplanter, to Israel, struggles with God, show that true blessing often comes through persistent struggle and a deep, personal encounter with the divine. Okay, taking the whole story of Jacob, the birthright and blessing, and the wrestling with God into account, here are some additional key takeaways and broader implications that are important for understanding the narrative and its significance. 1. The nature of God's election and covenant. Unconditional election, mostly. The story highlights that God's choice, election, of Jacob over Esau was made before they were even born. This suggests that God's plan is sovereign and doesn't depend on human merit or perfection. Jacob was chosen not because he was better, but because God chose him. Covenant continuity. The covenant established with Abraham and reconfirmed with Isaac is explicitly passed to Jacob, now Israel. This is the central theological thread. God is faithfully working through a chosen lineage to fulfill his promises, which ultimately lead to the nation of Israel, and, in Christian theology, to the Messiah. 2. The consequences of deception, even for God's chosen. While Jacob received the blessing and became the patriarch, his deceptive actions had very real and painful consequences. Exile. He spent decades away from his homeland and family, never seeing his mother Rebekah again after his flight. Deception reciprocated. He was tricked by Laban, in the same way he tricked his father, experiencing the bitterness of being deceived. This is often seen as a divine form of poetic justice, or a teaching lesson. Family dysfunction. The favoritism, Jacob for Rachel Joseph, and deception, brothers selling Joseph, that plagued his own family, mirrored the dysfunction that began with his own actions. His family was far from harmonious. This shows that even when God uses imperfect people for his purposes, their actions still have consequences. And God allows those consequences to play out, often for their character development. 3. Jacob's transformation and spiritual growth. The journey from Jacob, the supplanter, the heel grabber, the cunning deceiver, to Israel, he who struggles with God and overcomes, is central. The wrestling match at Peniel is the climax of this transformation. It's where his physical strength fails, and he truly encounters God in a way that leaves him both blessed and physically marked. It signifies a shift from relying on his own wits to relying on God. His reconciliation with Esau is another powerful moment, showing his own growth beyond fear and guilt. 4. The significance of Israel. The name Israel is not just Jacob's new name, it becomes the name of an entire people and a nation. It encapsulates the idea of a people who struggle with God, both in wrestling against him, like Jacob, and in striving for him. This name defines the identity of the Jewish people and their relationship with God throughout history. 5. Foreshadowing future conflicts. Edom versus Israel. While Jacob and Esau reconcile, their descendants, the Israelites and the Edomites, would go on to have a long and often hostile history. The initial rivalry between the brothers sets a prophetic stage for future national conflicts. 6. The role of women. Rebekah's pivotal role in engineering the blessing for Jacob is crucial. She is an active agent, but her actions also contribute to the family's division. The stories of Leah and Rachel, their rivalry, their desire for children, their negotiation for Jacob's attention, are also very human and show the complexities of polygamous family structures in that era. 7. The patriarchal era and the covenant. Jacob's story is the final major narrative in the patriarchal period. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. It completes the foundation for the eventual formation of the nation of Israel. The themes introduced here, covenant, chosenness, struggle, promise, land, are foundational to the rest of the Hebrew Bible. In essence, Jacob's story is a rich tapestry of human drama, divine sovereignty, and spiritual formation. It's not just a series of events, but a narrative that explores the complexities of faith, family, and God's interaction with deeply flawed human beings. Yes, absolutely. The story of Jacob, Yaqub in Arabic, is highly significant in Islam, and many of the core events are present in the Quran and Islamic tradition, often with similar meanings but sometimes with different nuances or added details. In Islam, Jacob Yaqub is revered as a prophet, Nabi, and one of the patriarchs, alongside Abraham, Ibrahim, and Isaac, Ishaq. He is considered a link in the chain of prophecy, leading to Moses, Musa, Jesus, Isa, and ultimately Muhammad. Here are some key Islamic perspectives on the events you asked about. 1. The birthright and blessing. Islamic perspective. Prophethood and divine choice. In Islam, the concept of a birthright in the sense of a double inheritance or a father's final, unchangeable blessing that dictates prophethood isn't emphasized in the same way as in some interpretations of the Hebrew Bible. Instead, the focus is on divine choice, istifa, for prophethood. God chooses who will be a prophet, and this choice is not based on who is born first or on human trickery. Ya'qub as a chosen prophet. Ya'qub is recognized as a prophet chosen by Allah. His prophethood is seen as a continuation of the divine guidance passed down from Ibrahim and Ishaq. The idea that he tricked his father to get a blessing for prophethood is generally not accepted in Islamic theology, as prophets are believed to be divinely guided and morally upright. Esau, Al-A's, and his descendants. Esau is known as Al-A's, or sometimes Esau, in Islamic tradition. He is also recognized as the brother of a prophet. His descendants are believed to be the Edomites, as in the Bible. While Esau is not seen as a prophet, there's no emphasis on him being cursed or less favored by God due to a trick. The focus remains on Yaqub's specific prophetic lineage. 2. The wrestling with God. Islamic perspective. No anthropomorphic wrestling. This is a major point of departure. In Islam, the concept of God, Allah, being a physical entity that wrestles with a human, is strictly rejected. Islam emphasizes the transcendence, tanzih, of Allah. He is beyond human comprehension, physical form, or any human-like attributes, spiritual struggle or angelic encounter. Islamic scholars interpret the wrestling in a symbolic or allegorical manner, or as an encounter with an angel. Spiritual struggle, jihad and nafs. It could represent Yaqub's intense spiritual struggle, his fervent prayers, and his internal battle against fear or doubt before confronting his brother Esau. This is known as jihad and nafs, struggle of the self, which is considered the greater jihad in Islam. Encounter with an angel. Many interpretations suggest it was an angel sent by Allah. The angel might have tested or prepared Yaqub, giving him strength or a message. An angel can appear in human form. The injury would then be a sign, or a test, not an act of cheating, by a divine being. The name Israel. The name Israel, is mentioned in the Quran, and it is explicitly identified as a name for Prophet Yaqub. It is commonly understood to mean, servant of God, Abdullah, or traveler by night in Arabic, or one who journeys to God. The association with struggling with God, in the sense of a physical fight, is not present. The term, Bani Israel, children of Israel, refers to the descendants of Prophet Yaqub. 3. Other key aspects in Islamic tradition. Prophet Yusuf, Joseph. The story of Prophet Yusuf, Joseph, Yaqub's beloved son, is detailed in an entire chapter, Surah Yusuf, of the Quran. It's considered one of the most beautiful and comprehensive narratives in the Quran, emphasizing themes of patience, sabr, reliance on Allah, forgiveness, and divine providence. Yaqub's grief over Yusuf's apparent death is vividly portrayed. Patience and trust in Allah, tawakkul. Yaqub's character in the Quran highlights his immense patience and deep trust in Allah, even in the face of immense personal tragedies, like the loss of Yusuf and Benjamin. His famous saying, Fa sabrun jamil, so beautiful patience, is a well-known expression of steadfastness, guidance and monotheism. Prophets like Yaqub are seen as beacons of monotheism, tawheed, calling people to worship the one God and to live righteously. Their stories serve as lessons and examples for humanity. The 12 tribes, Asbat. The 12 sons of Yaqub and their descendants are known as the Asbat or tribes, and are mentioned in the Quran as part of the lineage of prophets. In summary, while the core narrative arc of Jacob's life, his birth, flight, marriages, sons, and eventual move to Egypt, is consistent, the interpretation of certain miraculous or ambiguous events like the wrestling match differs significantly due to Islam's strict monotheistic understanding of Allah's attributes. The emphasis shifts to Yaqub's role as a prophet, his moral character, his patience, and his unwavering trust in God.